supply chains in Africa and in South Asia and in the rest of Asia are absolutely critical for food security. Before COVID, they were growing very quickly, they were transforming quickly, they're very dynamic. Small and medium enterprises are at the heart of those supply chains, and they've also been dynamic. What we've seen after the shock is that, as was mentioned, they were knocked to the mat, okay? And then after they were knocked to the mat, they put one arm up, another arm up, one leg up, another leg up, and they're getting up. And so I think that the key lesson is for donors, for governments, for private sector associations to say, look, it's rising back up again. Let's think in the nitty gritty of what are the things that are missing that we can help to leverage, help them get back up again, not reinvent the wheel, not push them aside and start the thing over ourselves, but try to think, what do they need to get lifted off that mat and help themselves to get up? And as I said, it's bones and blood. The bones are the wholesale markets, the highways, the cross-border ports and points. It's the physical infrastructure and the policies that surround it. The blood are all these active agents, the wholesalers, the logistics, what I call the hidden middle, the people that were ignored to a certain extent in the debates beforehand. They're the ones that are going to hook the farmers up to the consumers. They're the ones that will be champions of this. They're large enterprises like we've heard here. There are small enterprises like we've read about and heard in the case of the small fishers. And I think that e-commerce and digitalization will be part of that solution going forward. Thank you.
To state the obvious, we are currently facing an unprecedented crisis, which is putting unexpected pressure, certainly on food supply chains here across Asia. Resolving this, and I believe that resolving some of the pressure that we see on the food supply chains is possible. There are opportunities to do this, but it will require uncommon collaboration between governments, civil society, academia, and industry. Because at the end of the day, we need to ensure that consumers across Asia and globally have access to safe, healthy, and nutritious food. Thank you.
Some changes will go and some changes will stay. And if I could, if I had a wish that at least one good thing would come out of COVID, I would personally hope that it would help us to now really, as one collective, accelerate the work that we need to do to come to a more inclusive and a more sustainable food system. And I'm convinced that will need to be a global food system in order for it to be resilient, like we were just talking about, but also for it to be affordable for the 8 billion people on this planet. So I hope that is one change that COVID will really help us to drive home fast. Thank you. The Mecca.
Robert, I think really is the COVID has actually exposed the inefficient food supply chain that exists in the world, and it has also brought to the forefront that it's very difficult for us to achieve food security because of this inefficient food supply chain. And I think that post-COVID, after all this lockdown has been lifted everywhere in the world and we return back to normal, I think the global food players should look deeply at the food supply chain. It is so broken and they try as much as possible to fix it. I think that work has to be done both by private sector, by public sector, by civil society, and every other person who is super interested in food. There is a role that digital and e-commerce and infrastructure plays, and I think that bringing every party together will enable us to achieve an efficient food supply chain. There is no hunger in the world. It's actually a problem of supply chain.
I mean, it's always interesting when you talk to people from the private sector. Today was not different, that they focus just as much on the opportunities than on the challenges there. And I think that's really an important lesson for all of us who are studying what is going on, okay, to see the opportunities in the current crisis. Related to that, I really enjoyed the point on Nigeria, how so far most of the stories I heard about consumers' beliefs how on particular foods they should not eat because they would be infected by COVID. So here is a little bit the other way around, that actually the COVID gives an incentive to eat more healthy than before. That's very interesting.
Anything that has come from this health crisis is to make clear the centrality of the food system. So without food, no health. And I think what also the panels made clear, this big paradox that we're seeing. We see on the one hand food supply chains that are very resilient and have been able to hold up amidst these big shocks on supply sides and also big demand shocks, and continue providing food in general. Right? But we've also seen these big vulnerabilities to COVID-19 directly and indirectly because of the preventative measures that led to severe disruptions, and in which quite a bit of heterogeneity in the impacts are being felt across the system. So within that, what I learned from this panel particularly is, number one, that, well, what we know, of course, is that since the food system is mainly driven by market players, is that the individual players and collectively have shown quite a bit of entrepreneurship and innovation in order to prevent this overall health crisis to become a major food crisis around the world. We're not there yet, as the risks are still there, but particularly in the shifts that, in terms of entrepreneurship, made that Nameka was talking about, and quickly shifting his business into different locations to adapt to changing circumstances, Unilever providing credits to their suppliers and they make sure that their supply chains keep upright, but more particularly also the adjustments made through e-commerce, and both by big players, but most importantly what Tom Reardon emphasized by a lot of small and medium scale enterprises that, despite the big hits they've taken, that have found ways to pull themselves up. That doesn't mean we're there yet. Of course, with COVID-19, we can expect a lot of the ongoing dynamics to continue, maybe with renewed impulses also that have come from COVID-19 through this innovation and entrepreneurship in the private sector. But we also know that without good government support to facilitate the business in keeping the green lanes open for trade flows and workers, but also to facilitate food safety, as well as do the things that need to be done to protect access to food to many consumers. But also, and that will close with that, is the challenges that we had before COVID-19 are not going away. So we'll still have to challenge the threat of climate change affecting our food systems, the health threats that current food systems pose in many ways, and we've seen some good examples that maybe we see some shifts in the right direction, but probably not all is well once with the pandemic under control. So with that, we can only hope that with the entrepreneurship and innovation that we're seeing along food value chains, that will also be the basis to leverage towards more inclusive, healthy, and more sustainable food systems. And hopefully we can have more events like this to monitor well how the private sector is changing in all its forms and all its shapes in order to get to those more inclusive, healthy, and sustainable food systems.